When I travel on the boat into the city on the ferry, I'm always morbidly amused to see the EY Tower looming above the Circular Quay skyline. That's the Ernst & Young Tower, and that's because it's gold. Now, I may be being slightly prudish here, but building oneself a tower of gold is surely a sign of something. It appears to be a sign that they're just making too much damn money out of governments, all of them, the big four. Now, as far as we're aware, the rest of the big four, that's Deloitte, KPMG and PwC, don't have towers of gold, but their signage does adorn every major city skyscape in the world. Wherever the most expensive commercial property is, there you will find the big four and their office towers. There's some very interesting testimony emerged before the Senate's inquiry into consultants this week, otherwise known as the PwC inquiry. And that came from a former KPMG alumni, a Professor Brendan Lyon, who told the inquiry these firms are beyond the law.
Have we hit a point where these entities believe that they're bigger than government?
Yes. I'll point you to my submission where I included 2 direct letters that came from KPMG to the New South Wales Parliament.
Senator Deborah O'Neill then asked him, they believe they are beyond the law? To which Lyon responded, they believe they are beyond the law. This gets to the nub of it. Now, with this important caveat that the 4 most annoying words in the English language are, I told you so, we have been saying this for many years, maybe a decade now, that the big four are too big. And during that time, government revenues have absolutely exploded from about $300 million in 2013 to more than $1 billion now. And that's because federal governments, this is federal government revenue alone, not the states, which is possibly double. This is because government is literally being gutted before our eyes, privatised, outsourced to the big four and other consultants. And that is a serious problem for Australian society. Public money too, this public money, our money, has fired up their double-digit revenue growth in recent years. That's revenues, not profits. We don't know how much they make in profit because they don't disclose anything. Few companies notch up this sort of growth in revenue. Only tech startups and secretive big four partnerships. That's about it. PwC's income during this period has soared to more than $3 billion a year in Australia alone. It's pretty much for paper shuffling, for giving advice to companies and governments. The essential problem the government has, indeed the problem that we all have here as a society, is that it's become obvious that the big four have lost the plot. There's been a cultural decline. So dazzling are their profits, so dazzling their power and influence over governments, that they've been allowed to have this egregious conflict of interest, which has flourished. It's run out of control. This is the big thing, conflicts of interest. In the case of PwC, the firm is confidentially advising the government on reforms to tax laws, while it was selling its secrets, these very secrets, this advice, how to dodge these very same tax laws to foreign multinational companies such as Google Australia and Uber Australia. In turn, as we revealed recently on the website, these companies have been dodging hundreds of millions of dollars of tax in Australia, of corporate income tax. The problem here isn't the people that work for the big four, it's the system. Anybody with a bit of nous knows that governments are an easy touch for public money. All you've got to do is pay donations to the major parties and hang around Canberra being nice. To get to the crux of this elaborate systemic failure, this conflict of interest, you cannot be the gamekeeper and the poacher. You can't be the player and the referee. You can't be the cop and the robber. The only realistic answer to this epic problem of the rising power of private institutions over governments is to break them up. Now, the big four all began life as guardians of commerce, as auditors. They audit the financial statements for the world's largest companies. From there, they went on to become accountants of fortune and, unfortunately, unaccountable. So they used their audit platform, being boring old auditors, into tax advice to the very same corporations, telling them how to dodge tax as well as signing off true and fair on their financial statements. This in itself is a huge conflict of interest. How can you sign off true and fair when you've got some tax cowboy on the other side of the supposed mystical Chinese wall of rice paper, somebody paid much more than the auditor, inveigling the client into elaborate, aggressive tax scams? Somebody in the same company or in the same firm, partnership rather. Now add to this the outsourcing of government itself, the explosion, the privatisation of government. The Big Four, among the consultancy fraternity, are the biggest advisors to government. They tell government politicians and bureaucrats which laws to implement. This is an even bigger conflict. If your biggest clients are foreign multinationals, which they are, clearly you enhance your profits by advising governments to make laws in their favour, laws which benefit large foreign institutions. Conflicts of interest are the main story here. This is the big problem. The temptation of people in these firms to make huge profits at the expense of integrity and Chinese walls and arm's length and, lying, cheating and stealing. It's too much, hence the PwC scandal. That's the human story. The other thing to consider is secrecy. A lot could be achieved by forcing the Big Four to be transparent, compelling them to incorporate, to become companies, and to file financial reports like every other large company. Skulking about in corporate secrecy via this arcane structure, which they call a partnership, only having to disclose one fact per year, your revenue, your overall revenue, not even where it comes from. This is a big part of the problem. Secrecy. So the answers are there. You can bust them up. You can make them report and disclose things. The answers, as with most things in government, are there. The question is there the political will of those who govern us to make these big decisions, or are we just biding time like PwC's partners and its PR crisis managers for the whole horrid affair just to fade away? If you'd like to support independent journalism like us here at the West Report of Michael West Media, you can support us on Patreon and you can like, comment and share the videos below.
We hit a point where these entities believe that they're bigger than government.
Yes. I'll point you to my submission where I included 2 direct letters that came from KPMG to the New South Wales Parliament. They're quite shocking if you read them. The words that they used in the letter was that KPMG is profoundly disappointed that the Public Accountability Committee published evidence in its inquiry that has no probative value. Well, I guess if I was charged with murder, I'd say the gun with my fingerprints had no probative value, but I don't get to make that choice. Mr. Yates himself wrote a very spirited defence a few weeks later where he said the same thing, that he was profoundly disappointed in the New South Wales Parliament for publishing my response to a question on notice. This shows that the servant-master relationship has become somewhat confused. As I say, they are so used to being the arbiters that people turn to decide what's right and wrong, that in their own sins, they're trying to do the same thing. And they, very clearly don't understand that since the execution of Charles I, the restoration of Charles II, the primacy and sovereignty of parliaments has been absolute. I'd recommend you go to each of those letters, and particularly the one signed by Mr. Yates, because it speaks so firmly and so strongly to what you're saying. These firms are beyond the law.
Well, they believe they are.
They believe they are beyond the law. They're beyond corporations law. And if you take a dim read of what KPMG were trying to do in New South Wales, they were trying to subjugate the Cabinet's request for transparent visibility of the costs, risks and liabilities of a major public policy. They were doing so because they were completely conflicted, and then they attacked the Parliament and tried to refer a committee to the Privileges Committee for investigating it. I think that shows that, at least in the instance of KPMG, they have run way off reservation. They think they are beyond the law.